Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you for coming today. Please silence your phones. We have Secretary Kerry here today. He's going to respond to some questions regarding COP28. We want everyone to sort of keep their questions brief and on topic so that we can get to as many as we can. We're going to have 2 microphone runners going around, so if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we will get the microphone to you. When you do get the microphone, please state your name, your outlet, and the country where you're visiting from. Quick plug, if you are not signed up to receive updates from the U.S. delegation, please visit state.gov/COP28. You will get updates about everything that's going on over the next week. And if we don't get to your question today, please feel free to reach out to climatecomms@state.gov. Thank you very much, and we will have Secretary Kerry join us now.
Good afternoon. Does all your heads have to turn this way? I'm sorry. I'll just make an opening and maybe sit in the middle if that's easier for you. Thank you. It's great to be with everybody. I thank you for joining us today. You know, a little over a week ago, my team and I landed here in Dubai at COP28, and we came here with one central goal. And that is to follow the science and help keep 1.5 degrees Celsius alive as a limit on the warming of the planet. So some people have suggested here and there that the Paris Agreement hasn't worked because we are behind and we have a distance to go. But I would argue to everybody, and I think the evidence is clear, to the contrary. It has worked because I remember that before Paris, and I had the privilege of leading our negotiations in Paris. Before Paris, we were headed to 3.7 to 4 degrees of warming on the planet. And we didn't have a viable agreement among nations. And we weren't working together and coming together in a concentrated, coordinated way to try. As we all know, always difficult in international negotiations, but to try to move faster in one direction. So partly because of the work that we've done over these last 3 years, starting when President Biden took the oath, and I remember I was privileged to take that oath the same day later, but that's when we started work. And we are now, I am pleased to say, with the cooperation of people all over the world, with the cooperation of our colleagues and others, we are now substantially more on track. And I will say to you that I feel, having been to many, many COPs over the years, I feel a different energy here. I feel a different sense of mission and urgency, if you will. And I feel that people are really sensing that Mother Nature over the past year could not have been more clear with all of us, with the size of the floods and the fires and the changes in nation after nation about what is happening. Now, just the other day, this year, dubbed the hottest year in human history. And you see unbelievable warm, 4 times the rate of warming in the Arctic. It was 70 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Arctic last summer. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Antarctic. I mean, how much do you really need to look at to sense the full urgency of what we are looking at? So we need, let us make no mistake, despite everything I just said about some progress to date, we need to emphatically accelerate the pace of emission reductions. That is the only way to keep 1.5 degrees alive. And our choices need to be based on basic mathematics and physics and the evidence that we understand and the best judgment of the best scientists in the world. Here in Dubai, through the first week of the Paris Agreement, the global stocktake, we have the ability to measure exactly what we've done and what we've not done. That's what the Paris stocktake will give us. And we will also have a chance to measure with honesty, candor, comprehensively, and hopefully with some vision on the part of the road ahead. But we will have the ability to be able to measure exactly what we've done and not done, and what the gaps are: financial gaps, emissions gaps, reduction in adaptation, and across the board. And I believe it is really important we do this with candor and with comprehensiveness. Already here in Dubai and in the walk up to this meeting, I would say to you, we have done a lot in this first week. And we've accomplished real things. About a month ago, when we met with Minister Xia Zhenhua in Palm Springs at Sunnylands and with his team, and we produced the Sunnylands Statement. And in that statement, we both agreed that our 2035 nationally determined contributions required by the Paris Agreement need to be economy-wide, and they need to include all greenhouse gases, which unfortunately many have not to date. This is a major step forward because it's only by getting non-CO2 gases into this mix that we're going to be able to raise the ambition and be inclusive enough to actually have a shot at accomplishing our goal. And today, about half the greenhouse gases that are warming the planet come from non-CO2 gases, and particularly from methane. Methane being 80 to 100 times more destructive than CO2 in the early years, and about 20 times more destructive in the later years. But either way you cut it, it's a hell of a lot more destructive than CO2. So we also agreed that the global stocktake should encourage other parties, all parties, no excuse for all parties not living here signing up to the same measure with respect to the 2035 NDCs. At the beginning, which by the way, we also agreed to deploy more renewables. And we agreed to do that specifically with the goal of being able to anticipate a reduction in emissions during the 2020s. And for all of you who have been following, what's happening globally on emissions reductions and on targets, you understand that China is saying we're going to do and try to target this for the 2020s is a move from where we have been. We can talk more about that if you want. But at the beginning of this week, as you all know, we had an historic moment. Never before on the first day of a COP have we taken a complicated and even controversial issue and been able to agree on it and start with a major agreement. And it is a major agreement. And I'm very proud of the work that Sue Biniaz and others on our team did throughout the summer working with the Transitional Committee, which included a lot of other countries, in order to be able to try to deal with the difficult issues that existed. So now we have a fund for climate impact response, and I think it's already got a certain amount of money in it to help stand it up. In the last 7 days, we've also made substantial progress on all aspects of the clean energy transition. Together with the EU and UAE, we co-led the pledge to triple renewables, double energy efficiency by 2030, and that now includes over 120 countries. We led, along with 5 other countries, including the UAE, the pledge to triple nuclear energy by 2050, which now includes over 20 countries from 4 continents. And we built supports that no new unabated coal plants should be built anywhere and permitted anywhere in the world, and we joined the Powering Past Coal initiative. We launched the first ever international fusion strategy just yesterday in a meeting of some incredibly smart people. One of them, our former Energy Secretary, Ernie Moniz, who was a partner with me in some of the work we did on the Iran nuclear agreement. And I can tell you that, he went from a skeptic as an MIT professor through his years to now believing very deeply that this has the potential, real potential, to become real and to transition. We also held the first ever methane summit with China in the UAE. And this week, governments, philanthropies, and the private sector mobilized over $1 billion in new grant funding and more than triple current global levels. And this includes a $255 million fund from a select few, a group of 6 oil and gas companies that agreed that they can use their expertise to help some of these countries be able to reduce their methane leaks or flaring or venting. And they each agreed to put up $25 million and to put people on the ground and to help provide the technology and other things necessary to make this happen. And the World Bank has assumed responsibility for the beginning of this, startup of a $255 million fund at the World Bank that will help to provide, that these reductions will take place, and also to cut methane from oil and gas, and the $200 million research effort on methane from livestock. We also saw major emitters like Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan and Kosovo and several others join the global methane pledge, bringing us to a total of 155 total members. And I just remind everybody here, our pledge is to reduce methane by 30% globally by 2030. Well, if we do that, as we've been told by the IEA, that is the equivalent of every car in the world, every truck in the world, every ship in the world, every airplane in the world, all going to zero emissions by that period of time. So it's ambitious, but it's doable. And it's particularly doable now with the new focus on methane. Along with Prime Minister Støre from Norway, we hosted a Green Shipping Challenge event, which featured over 40 new announcements to cut emissions from a sector, from one sector. And if that one sector were a country, it would be the equivalent of being the 8th largest emitter in the world. We also, and by the way, with the new IMO regulations, which we all lobbied for in the course of the year, the shipping industry, Yara, Maersk, MSC, all of whom are ordering carbon-free ships now, are going to be turning over the entire fleet over the course of the next 20 years. And we also participated in the first ever Health Day here at the COP, and we hosted the first ever Gender Day. So from Paris to now, climate finance has been a critical missing element. Everybody knows that. And just this week, we've also seen significant progress. We announced estimates that U.S. climate finance is expected to go above $9.5 billion in 2023, on track to meet President Biden's pledge for 2024. And thanks to our engagement over the last year with the new head of the World Bank and the reforms that were put in place in the fall meeting and the spring meeting, we are now in a better place to have MDBs be able to lend significantly more money. I think the total of last year was about $60 billion. Now, just with the World Bank alone, we look at the possibility of about $150 billion. You add that to others, we're starting to talk about the ability to leverage $1 trillion or more, and that's what we need to be doing. So we also recognize that these increases in climate finance are a key reason that the OECD, and here many of you will appreciate this, we keep hearing about the $100 billion that was promised in Paris, and it's been used as a weapon in some cases, occasionally in the negotiations. Well, now we know from the OECD that they expressed confidence that the $100 billion collective mobilization goal was not only going to be met this year, but it was actually met last year. So the U.S. has now pledged to contribute $3 billion to the Clean Climate Fund under its replenishment. And finally, we've redoubled efforts to attract private and philanthropic finance, including through initiatives like President's call for the Prepare Action and the blended finance for the Energy Transition Program and the Methane Finance Sprint and the Energy Transition Accelerator, which we're working on with the Bezos Foundation and the Bezos Foundation and the Rockefeller Fund. So, my friends, we've had a pretty damn good week here in Dubai already. Now, obviously, there are some complicated issues to still resolve. We all know that. Nobody's ducking and nobody's going to pretend about that. So our negotiators are now hard at work. It is not yet at the level where it's gone to the ministers, but in the course of the next few days it will, and the negotiators are basically trying to put together in each section which are relevant a set of options. And then we ministers will have the fun and pleasure next week of kind of noodling through those options. So that's where we are, and without further ado, I'm happy to answer some questions. I know it was better that I sit over there or stand here. Any takers? Here's fine. Okay, you want to save a few minutes, huh? So all right. Yes, I don't know who's, I think somebody is designated to walk around and, yes, please.
I would like to ask my question in Arabic, and here he gonna translate it. إذا سيد كيري أفدت أن الولايات المتحدة والصين توصلتا إلى تفاهمات واتفاقات بشأن قضايا المناخ. هذا ما قد سيساعد في يعني تحقيق تقدم حول محادثات مؤتمر الأمم المتحدة. هل هي تفاهمات ظرفية تتعلق بملفات القمة أم ستشكل مدخلا لتفاهمات طويلة الأمد في هذا الشأن بين الولايات المتحدة والصين؟
You, sir, stated that the United States and China have reached an understanding and agreements on climate issues, which will help achieve progress in the negotiations here at COP28. Are these conditional understandings related to the summit's mandated outcomes, or are they an entry point to long-term talks on this matter?
Well, it's conceivable that they're both, because we pledged to work together to make the COP a success, and there are sections in there that address some of the questions where we reached agreement in order to help do that. And secondly, we set up we rekindled the efforts of a working group that we'd previously agreed on, but we added some thoughts to it. And we're both anxious to see that work group going forward, be able to assist in breaking down some barriers and perhaps adding more capacity to us to be able to do something. We both recognize important responsibility for our citizens and globally for citizens all around the world. China is in fact, while the largest emitter in the world significantly, they are working, I'd say, I give them credit, hard to try to transition more rapidly, which is why I think they agreed with us to try to meet a higher, a goal. But China is the largest producer of renewable energy in the world, also the largest deployer of renewable energy in the world by far, more than all the other countries put together. And the one thing we have a difference on that we're continuing, no, not one thing, we have a number of differences. But the biggest difference we have is obviously the challenge of new coal. And the hope would be that as they deploy the renewables, that will diminish the demand for that coal, some of which is working at a very low capacity even right now. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details on it, except to say that if we have any chance of hitting the 1.5 and holding on to it, we need the help of all of the largest economies of the world, of which China and the United States are both 1 and 2. We're number 1, they're number 2 in terms of size of economy. But we have to get the other 18 members of that, that group to be able to really move a lot faster than they are. Oh, one final thing. In terms of the other targets within there that you mentioned, will it also help in terms of the mitigation and the Paris Agreement? The answer is yes, because of the commitment they made to reduce emissions sooner and also to include all of their greenhouse gases in their next NDC. That is mitigation, pure and simple, and it is a raising of ambition. I'm not, somebody here is designated, somebody who works.
Hi. You gave me the microphone earlier. Lisa Friedman from the New York Times. Thank you. Sir, you're aware of the comments that Sultan Al-Jaber has faced criticism for, that there's no science to underpin a need for a phase-out of fossil fuels to reach 1.5. Do you believe that the science calls for a phase-out? Are you satisfied with his explanation? And can you tell us why the U.S. isn't pushing as hard as, say, the EU for a phase-out language?
Well, we are. We voted with the EU, with members of the EU, because not all the EU is in the G7, but the G7, we voted for phasing out. And we've said consistently that we need to do what we need to do to follow the science. So, you know, the science requires net zero emissions by 2050. And the science requires that we be at about a 43% minimum reduction by 2030. Our target is 50 to 52% by 2030. And we believe we're on target. We have an economy that's growing in the past year, but we still have reductions of 3% in the emissions. Now, is that enough? No, it's not enough. But the IRA is just taking hold. And we're seeing a remarkable response to the IRA and what it's bringing to the table. So we are really excited about the prospect of what is happening and what can happen as we go forward. Now, remember what I just said. The science says we have to reduce the emissions. It doesn't prescribe some particular discipline that has to be done. It says reduce the emissions. And so we believe that that means if you're going to reduce the emissions and you're actually going to hit the target of net zero by 2050, you have to do some phasing out. There's no other way to get to that target. So we are said very clearly that you got to have a largely a phase out of fossil fuels in our energy systems by 2050, focusing carbon capture technologies on the hardest to abate sectors like steel and cement and aluminum and concrete and so forth. Now, it's going to be a mix, folks, of things that get us to success here. But, and the global stocktake has to call for other mitigation efforts, including tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, stopping new unabated coal power generation, halting and reversing deforestation, reducing methane, and other non-CO2 emissions. And if we don't do all of the above and target what the science says, we will not get to net zero 2050. Next question. Over here, way over there.
I'm
Yes.
here. Mona Lisa Freja, النهار العربي.
I couldn't hear that, I'm afraid.
Mona Lisa Freja, النهار العربي. USA, I want to follow up on my colleague question. As I heard you saying, would you prefer using the term phase out in the final statement? And is the world really ready now to stop using fossil fuel? And to what extent the economy would suffer?
What was the last part of that?
To what extent you think the global economy would suffer?
Well, we're not proposing a suffering economy. That's the farthest thing from President Biden's approach to this. And we don't believe that the options in front of us require either sacrifice or diminishing economy. We just don't. The United States of America right now just implemented major reductions. We just had our EPA and others lay out rules with respect to emissions going forward. And we're convinced that the other side of this transition is an upside for people. I mean, currently, with the amount of emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere, very specifically greenhouse gas emissions, methane, CO2, particulates, if you look at that, you will see every analysis confirms that those emissions are killing people today. A new study just came out from, I think it was George Mason, University of Texas, and Harvard Chan School of Health, which say that coal particulates are responsible for twice as many deaths as the other particulates. Now, obviously, we all have a responsibility to not be responsible for continuing a policy that we know is taking lives, moving people away from where they live, climate injustice, diminishing people's ability to be able to stay where they want to stay, or live in the heat that they have to live in, lose the water that they have today, live with drought, and all the other problems. Those are real. And so we don't think that that's the offering of dealing with the climate the way we talk. Our economy is growing, and the jobs of renewable energy are actually growing a lot faster in America than the jobs of fossil fuel. And now the IEA has clearly stated that they detect in this decade, around the end of the decade, 28, 29, they think that we will have a peak in fossil fuel demand, and they noticed a terminal decline starting in this decade with respect to fossil fuel demand. So it's not John Kerry or Joe Biden or any of us who are creating this dynamic. It is climate crisis coupled with the slow response of people who need to respond faster to make it happen, and to take, to begin to seize the benefits that await people out there. Let me just give you an example. We have about 100 of the biggest and best corporations in the world, and corporations take a lot of flack. We realize that. And there has been greenwashing in the past. We all understand that. But just think about this. Google, Apple, Microsoft, Salesforce, Boeing, United, Delta, Ford Motor Company, General Motors, Volvo, Maersk, Yara, MSC, you can run a long list here, Amazon. Many others have all joined this coalition to send a demand signal to the marketplace that it's good to buy green now and help accelerate the transition. And by buying green now, you send a message up and down the food chain that there's money to be made. There's a better market out there. And those pathfinders are going to do well in the long run because, people are going to be, I think, sensitive and grateful to companies that behave the way we all need to with respect to this challenge. And their CEOs, let me be blunt, Lafarge Holcim is making green cement right now. They're making green. People are buying the green cement not because it's green, but because it's better cement. I mentioned Yara and Maersk and MSC and the ships they're now buying that are carbon. There's a carbon-free ship in the port right here. Ammonia, Fortescue, Andrew Forrest, who brought the ship over here on ammonia. So bottom line, folks, we think there's huge economic reason for people to be looking to this transition. And every analysis says it costs more to wait or to avoid it than it will to do it now. So I think the economics of this are pretty clear. And you have smart CEOs of companies like that, folks. They must know something.
Seth Borenstein, the Associated Press. Going into the harder week next week, what are requirements for the U.S. that have to be in the GST, regardless, and what are the red lines for the United States that cannot be in there? And finally, which countries are you afraid of being the biggest obstacles to the phase-out language?
Well, if I were to tell you that, I'm going to make people bigger obstacles. So I ain't going there. I will just tell you that we have some tough issues next week, but I think we have people of good faith who know that this is an international negotiation of consequence. And people will measure who steps up and who doesn't. I just think I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to go through all the details of the negotiation and say what our red lines are or not. I actually haven't sat, we sort of inherently know on our team what some of the red lines are, but we haven't ever sat there and said, okay, where are we here? We need to see what the options are that we get sent by the teams, and then we'll sit down and evaluate what the possibilities are. I can just tell you this, our North Star, and you've heard it a number of times around here, is 1.5 degrees. And we want to do everything we can to be on that track. And we want to be reasonable about what we do. There has to be a fairness in the air here. We don't want people just coming in and automatically, because their vested interest or they're feeling maybe, punched a little bit here, We got to do what the science tells us we need to do. And the science has been clear. In 2018, the best scientists in the world at the IPCC told the world, you, they said, meaning all of you who are in a position of responsibility to make a difference, you have 12 years left within which to make the key decisions that will be able to remove the threat of the worst consequences of the climate crisis. Now it's 6 years. We get in next year, it's 6 years, not 12. And let's ask ourselves, how well have we used the last 6 years? So this is crunch time. Folks, look, I didn't make up the science here, but I know enough to know that if people who are scientists who've spent a lifetime studying this issue are telling me that they are alarmed, they are terrified, they believe we are in uncharted territory, and that's what they've all said, quoted in some of your newspapers. You personally, some of you have written those stories. And if that's where we are, and the Arctic is at a crazy rate of melting, and it's at 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the summertime, and 100 degrees in the Antarctic, and you look at the fires in Greece and Australia and Russia and around the world, come on, what do you need? Are you telling me that the bottom line of companies that make $4 trillion globally in the course of an entire year, that somehow is at risk here? Come on. It's time to really get serious and make as much happen as we can. I'm not telling you that everybody's going to come kumbaya to the table, but I am telling you we're going to make our best effort to get the best agreement we can, to move as far as we can, as fast as we can, and that's what people in the world want us to do. It's time for adults to behave like adults and get the job done.
I'm Yusra Adel from Al Ittihad newspaper politics section. Sir, how do you evaluate the result of COP28 up till now? And what do you hope to achieve before COP ending?
What do I evaluate the what of COP28?
The results of COP28, the result of COP28
I think I
till
said
now.
all of that in my opening statement, to be honest with you. I'm not trying to cheat you of a question. But I think I answered everything that I saw had happened in the COP, and I've told you the results need to be the most we can get to be responsible. Here's the big framework of the stocktake, in my judgment. There are 3 mandated outcomes. Outcome number 1 was the fund for climate response, for climate impact response. That's already number 1. That was mandated. We do something. We did something. Number 2 is adaptation, the report from adaptation and raising effort there. We will, I'm confident, do something. And the final one of those was I'm drawing a blank here, which was the, let me see, the stocktake, the adaptation, and I believe on the mitigation, what we're doing, and also on the finance, and not just the finance, but also the effort to be able to bring countries together in this, structure that we've talked about to deal with methane and other critical gases in order to move faster. I think those challenges, the shipping challenge, the other things, we want those embraced in the language of this agreement, and hopefully there will be. That's my hope. And we have new finance mechanisms I mentioned to you. Those need to be also incorporated in, we hope, into the stocktake. We'll see what happens. But the most important of those 3 critical, already mandated outcomes.
Bonjour.
Who's
Hi.
Bonjour?
Sir? Hello.
Aha!
Yes, this is Jeanne Richard for Radio France International. So what is the position of the US about CCS? The European Union is critical about on a large-scale use of these technologies. So what is your position?
My position is the scientific position. The science says we cannot get to net zero 2050 without some CCUS, or CCS at any rate. That's what they say. If you're going to run the numbers here, you need to reduce. Now, already there are companies that do it. I mean, look at Occidental, which is an oil and gas company. They're all in on direct air carbon capture. They're capturing carbon. Other companies have historically used carbon dioxide that they capture in order to do enhanced oil production. Now, that not be what a lot of people want to have happen here, but at least you can capture it. And so we're exploring that. The IRA wants to push the curve because we're in such a predicament, we think, that we have to have an all-of-the-above approach here. We're also obviously pushing the potential of nuclear. I mean, France, par exemple, produces, about 70%, 68 now or something maybe, of its power comes from nuclear. France sells nuclear power to Germany and so we have nuclear power in California. We have that nuclear power goes to Arizona and other states. Nuclear power right next door to my state. It was protested vehemently when they were thinking of building it. I can't remember, 30 years, 40 years ago. I can't remember how long ago. But I was in the Senate for 28 years representing Massachusetts, and during all those years, we used nuclear in our power base, about 20%. So, folks, you got to be realistic. If you're going to get to where we want to go, reducing the emissions, we got to use the technologies we have today. Maybe something's going to break in well before that. Nobody says we're frozen into having to go 20 years with one technology. Fusion may turn out to be just an enormous game changer. Battery storage, you may find. Hydrogen may bring that price down, and then all of a sudden it's competitive. And as the infrastructure builds up, we have a lot of options. I'm excited, frankly, about what I see right now. It's very different from where we've been previously. And about $1.7 trillion of venture capital now chasing these solutions. And that's different from any time, anywhere we've ever been before in this race. So I think that, you can raise some very legitimate questions about CCUS, but you also can see it working in certain ways. And our hope is that the marketplace is going to help decide by price points what works and what doesn't. And look at solar. Solar's come down 85% in price. Wind's come down 53% in price. It's now cheaper than these other forms. And the more people begin to see it working, and the more they see that grids can be balanced, particularly with AI, AI is going to play a very big role in the future of this battle. And so I think we have enormous opportunities here for differential. Thank you.
Over here, sir. Right here.
Sir, are you satisfied with the amount the contributions in the Lost and Damaged Fund till now? And this contribution, does he have a target amount to be collected?
For the climate impact? Yeah, the president announced that we would immediately put in $17.5 million of budget money that we have now. But that's not all the United States is putting on the line here. We put $1 billion on the line to deal with the methane, and we've put the other money that I articulated with respect to the Global Climate Fund, $3 billion, and so forth. So all in all, the United States is proud to be the largest humanitarian donor in the world. That is a fact. And when you look at what we do with $30 billion that's been going to Africa for health concerns and other things, don't just look at one package. But what we did the other day with the Climate Impact Response Fund was simply to empower it to stand up. That's not the money. The money you see in there now is not the distribution money. It's the money to make it work. They got to work through what the regulations, what the approach will be, what the standards will be by which people qualify, what's the lending process going to be. And we insisted that all of that happened very quickly. So I believe the fund will stand up, and people who are, there's no limit on who can contribute to this, by the way. That is left open. It's not a requirement that, only the big economies contribute. If you're an emerging economy and you've got the ability to put a few $100 million or $10 million or something in it, you want to help your fellow human beings, that's open to that too.
Hi. Thank you, Secretary Kerry. This is Sarah Schoenhart from Politico's E&E News. There are reports that Russian President Vladimir Putin is coming to the UAE to discuss oil cooperation, and since this COP is very focused on fossil fuels and potential phase out or phase down, I wonder how you think his presence in the region and those discussions could impact the process here.
Well, I think by virtue of what he's done in Ukraine, his presence may encourage people to do what Europe has done, which is the most rapid move to a different kind of fuel as a result of his actions. He single-handedly accelerated the transformation of Europe more than anybody else by weaponizing gas. And I think a lot of people here remember that, and that's sort of the overpowering thing. I don't think it's going to affect anything. Other than you're mentioning it here, I'd sort of forgotten that he might be coming in the region, but it doesn't affect us here. I'm not, you got to look, who's?
Right here? Back here?
Doug, I hope you know, I hope you, okay, go ahead.
Hello.
Where are we?
Back here, sir. Back here.
Okay,
Akila from Line News, département French. Je parle français, mais je peux parler en anglais aussi. My question is, how do you envision bridging the gap between developed and developing nations in terms of climate finance and technology transfer to support climate adaptation and mitigation efforts? Thank you.
Merci. I took the easy road.
How do you envision bridging the gap between developed and developing nations in terms of climate finance and technology transfer to support climate adaptation and mitigation efforts?
Great question. Every one of the initiatives that I articulated earlier, the ETA, the various lending, the programs, the money the President's putting up, all of those things are going to help to accelerate the dispersal of money. The World Bank, ability to leverage. Here's where we've been, just very quickly. I don't want to go too long, but we've had a lot of programs and initiatives without money behind them. And we've all seen the struggle for $100 billion for the last whatever number of years. I guess it was 2015, so from 2016 forward, we've been struggling. No government in the world, this is what I sort of landed on when I finished being Secretary of State, the recognition that no government in the world has enough money to affect this transition. I mean, if we wanted to be the nicest, best, biggest donor beyond where we are today, we don't have the money, and we're the richest economy on the planet. So what happened was in Glasgow, we worked together with the Glasgow presidency, with Alok Sharma, and with Mark Carney and a group of people, and they put together the GFANs, the Global Alliance of Asset Owners and Managers, because they have the money. And they came up with about $131 trillion that they felt would be ready to invest in climate-related kinds of activities if, here's the if you have a bankable deal. In other words, these folks, most of them are subject to fiduciary rules. They have to caretake the money that's given to them in certain ways that meet standards, which is what the world wants. We don't want fly-by-night operation where people run away with people's money. So you have standards. And those standards require you to do due diligence. Well, if you're in a business today and you're an asset manager, your due diligence should require you to take a look at what's the prospect of this investment. If I put $100 million into a bunch of condos on the coast of Florida or in Bangladesh or in, the island states of the Pacific, Are they going to be there in 10 or 15 years? It would be irresponsible. So applying a standard to investment is not an unsmart thing to do. The problem is, it makes it harder. A lot of these companies, and I've talked a lot with these guys. Obviously, I've been in public life, but investing, I was on the banking committee and the finance committee, and I was chairman of the small business committee. I know something about investing. And people invest for a couple of purposes: to earn the most money they can as fast as they can, or to protect the money they have and earn a regular income that's safe, or a combination of the two. That's it. And so these companies are going to decide, hey, there's too much political unrest in that country, or there's just a new dictatorship that came in. We can't go there. Or, that place is corrupt, or whatever it is. There's currency issues. There's, force majeure. There are all kinds of things that enter into risk. And that's why we set up a fund to try to address risk, to do what's called blended finance. The JET-P that we did with Indonesia took us a year and a half, but it's a deal where we put money on the table, and it helps them to be able to take the risk away and attract private capital. So they got $10 billion from the public sector, $10 billion from the private sector, and you get a deal. We did the same thing in Egypt with Nuefe, where Egypt agreed to take out 11 gas turbines, or 8, and send gas to Europe. They didn't need it because they took the gas out, and they would deploy renewables in their place. A 15-gigawatt net shift in emissions. That's what we were trying to do. And so, but we could only do it if we had some cash. We had to put $500 million on the table in Egypt, too. So, by the way, we don't have time for John Kerry or anybody else to be running around the world taking a year and a half, 2 years to get a deal together. We won't make 1.5 if that's the way we do it. So we've got to find a way to unleash a torrent of that money, and that's why we have the ETA and the other finance mechanisms that you see coming onto the table. So we can excite the marketplace. And the more excited the marketplace gets, the more you're going to see some of these managers and owners say, oh, man, there's money to be made in that. Let's get in there. And that changes the whole ballgame. And that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. We do need to leave the room ready for 5 p.m. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Kerry. This is Kiyoshi Ando of Nikkei newspaper in Japan. I understand that with the IRA, USA is leading the way for decarbonization, but there is a worry among your partners, including Japan, that when there's an election in the United States, the result of the election sometimes makes the country to change its course dramatically.
You're a diplomat.
How could you address this issue?
How do we address that issue? In other words, what happens if a certain person is elected? What I'm about to say to you is I really believe to my core. There was a time when that might have made all the difference, but not now. When Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and zero funded, by the way, for 4 years, there was no money, so that's part of the problem we faced when President Biden came in. But when he pulled out, something else happened. In America, we have a renewable portfolio law. All across our states, 50 states, have a renewable portfolio capacity move. They all have passed these kinds of laws. And so whether it was California or New York or, a Midwest country or whatever, over 1,000 mayors and 37 governors all kept moving forward on the things that they'd pledged to do. So even while Donald Trump was president, 75% of the new electricity in the United States came from renewables. Now, I assume he didn't know it or he would have tried to stop it. But that's what happened. So Donald Trump may have pulled out of the Paris Agreement, but I'm telling you, the American people stayed in that agreement. And now, because of the economic decisions that have been made, Ford Motor Company, Volvo, General Motors, do you think, having decided to make electric vehicles, there's some reason they're going to suddenly turn around and go back to internal combustion engine? Not on your life. They're not going to do that. Nor are these other CEOs of big companies like Google and others who know they've got huge data centers, and they need to be clean in those data centers. And Scope 1 and 2 and Scope 3 will require that they do things to be clean. That's the change that has taken over. So I say to you with complete confidence, we will get to a global, low-carbon, no-carbon economy. We will get there. The only question is, will we get there in time to avoid the worst consequences of this crisis, as we were warned by the 2018 IPCC report? The scientists should guide this just like they're guiding every other choice. And I think that's where we are. Thank you all. I'll do another one of these when we finish, hopefully on the 11th, 12th, whatever it is. Thank you all.